Okay.
The next part that we will cover replacing is the latch. In order to replace the latch, first follow the previous steps in order to get the clapper up in the latched open position. Start by removing the cover bolts. After removing the cover bolts, remove the cover and the cover gasket. Using the dry valve wrench or the dry valve resetting tool, putting it through the hook assembly and applying a sharp downward force to spring the clapper into the latch position. At this point, now we can remove the external pipe plug from the valve to expose the latch pin. With the pipe plug now removed, you can now see the latch pin inside of the valve. Before removing the latch, you are going to want to place something in the valve to cover the inlet of the valve. At this point, you can now release the clapper arm assembly from the latch and pull it down. With one hand, you will need to hold onto the latch, while the other hand, you will want to push the latch pin out from the side of the valve. The latch can now be removed from the valve. To install the new latch, you will need to pull down on the clapper arm, and you will want to line up the hole in the latch with the holes in the valve. An easy way to do this would be to put the latch up in the valve and look through the side where the latch pin was removed to line up the holes. Once the holes are lined up, you can reinsert the latch pin through the latch in the back of the valve. The external plug can now be reinstalled into the valve. Still filming?
Yes.
Once the plug is installed, we can now reset the valve. Up to this point, the parts that we have covered replacing were able to be replaced with the valve still left in the riser by only removing the cover plate and working inside of the valve. At this point, the parts that we are going to cover replacing will require that the valve have the trim removed from it and it is removed from the riser, as it will be necessary to split the base from the housing to repair any of the other parts in the valve. At this point, we will now need to remove the cover bolts from the cover. With the cover bolts now removed, we can remove the cover and the cover gasket. We will now need to release the clapper assembly from the latch position by inserting either the dry valve resetting tool or the dry valve wrench and applying a sharp downward force to spring the clapper open into the latch position. Once we have this done, in order to separate the housing from the base, we will need to turn the valve over so that the base is in the upright position. Once the valve is inverted with the base in the upright position, we will now need to remove each of the bolts to separate the base from the housing. Once the bolts are removed, the base can now be separated from the housing. Once the base is separated from the housing, you can now remove the old member assembly. The member assembly kit comes pre-assembled, so to install the new member assembly kit, all you will need to do is take the member assembly kit and install it into the valve, making sure that you line up the holes of the diaphragm with the holes in the housing. You will also want to make sure that the hook assembly is lined up with the set screw. Once the new member assembly is installed, we can now install the base back onto the housing, lining up the holes of the base with the holes in the member assembly and the housing. You will also want to make sure that the outlet for the trim on the housing lines up with the outlet for the trim on the base. Once everything is lined up, you can reinstall the bolts. Once the bolts are back in and hand tightened, you can use a torque wrench to cross tighten each of the bolts to make sure that the diaphragm is in the proper position. Once the base and the housing are reassembled, the valve can now be reinstalled into the riser and have the trimming reinstalled onto it. This concludes our repair parts demonstration for the model F-1 and F-2 dry pipe valves.